Yeah, and you wonder if this guy, because the flying spaghetti monster thing was started as a joke, and they did it. It was a bunch of college kids that got together and started it, just as a joke. And we think about it. The high priest is called a pastafarian, and his headgear is a colander. That you strain the noodles in. It's all a bunch of nonsense, and that there's people who believe it. It just
look at all the people that follow Jim Jones.
Oh yeah. So there, I think we finally got this going.
Well, that was a call, right? Salt and merchant.
Yeah, Central America. Yeah,
We all
they've been
took
there.
cyanide.
Yeah.
That's right.
We all had to take cyanide.
They all drank the Kool-Aid.
Wasn't the other thing wasn't that
Yeah.
like Heaven's Gate thing? Remember that?
That was another thing. Yeah.
There she is. Hello. Silence for a moment. Yeah,
In 10 minutes, it'll be different.
I know. If that long, 5 minutes. Come over here.
And she also went,
Seats right there.
Not everybody.
No, I'm not. You're both here. You want the hop up here? Is that it?
Go down.
There you go.
yeah, I know, you're right. He's caught in some of that stuff.
So-
Because
It's just like them other guys, it's like. I try to break them.
Or something?
Lord help him. Well, there,
Try one of those.
put somebody more beneficial on that time slot. That's a good time slot.
Exactly, it is.
Because a lot of people are driving home from work.
Yeah.
They're tuning to the radio and then they listen to something.
Well, you know,
Sure.
she wants some stew. Look at puppy soup. You want to try it? I'm sure try a bite of
It's
it.
just be quiet. And that's getting hard to find.
Yeah, it is.
Getting back to the three angels here. We had gotten over there in Revelation 14. And in verse number 9, where it says, "And the third angel followed them," and hence three angels, saying with a loud voice, "If any man worship the beast and his image and receive his mark in his forehead or on his hand," they're claiming that mark is worshiping on Sunday.
Where does it say it in the Bible?
Well, they must read this way. "And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If any man worship the beast in his image and worship on Sunday," on the
That's
first day of the
not what
week.
it says.
No, it doesn't say anything at all about that.
My thinking
But-
was that when Christ was arisen, he arose on the first day,
Mhm.
correct? The
Well-
first day is not the Sabbath.
And see, that's the thing.
I mean, they're claiming that there's a day that it's wrong to worship. Is there any
Well,
day
yeah,
that
they
it's wrong
claim
to
that you can
worship?
worship on first, second, or I'm sorry, on the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh day of the week. But if you worship on the first day of the week, you receive the mark of the beast. So,
And that's silly right there.
I think
6
we should
days
worship
shalt
the
thou
Lord every
worship
day.
the Lord thy God, and on the seventh you'll receive condemnation.
No.
That's nonsense. It's just nonsense. But see, what they contend is that the Pope changed the day of worship from the sixth or the seventh day of the week, which starts at sunset on Friday. So we're now on the seventh day of the week, the moment the sun goes down,
Yeah,
until sunset on Saturday.
yeah.
And then the Pope changed the days of worship from the seventh day to the first day, and that he's the Antichrist and he's changing the times. And so hence worshiping on Sunday is receiving the mark of the beast.
So they were saying that the New World Order is going to use the Sabbath day through the Pope
Oh, yeah.
to suppress that.
Well, and most of you have probably missed it, but there's a growing movement worldwide to make people not work on Sundays, not do anything on Sundays, close all the stores on Sundays. Not
how we were kids, though.
Yeah. Well, like I said, in case you missed it, it's a growing movement. I don't know. I thought it was the other way around. I mean, I remember when I was a kid thinking, oh, why can't we stop by the store? Well, it's closed. It's
My
Sunday.
mom used to
Remember
say, "Oh,
Blue
Saturday,
Laws?
we gotta get to the grocery
Yeah,
store."
Blue Laws, remember?
Exactly.
Well, it's not a growing movement to close things on Sunday. It's been a growing thing to open things on Sunday.
So everybody that's going shopping and
Yeah.
doing anything else on a Saturday, they're breaking the Sabbath.
Well, as long as you do it before, as long as you do it after sunset. You got to do it after sunset, I guess. And the other thing too is when I was in England, they still had restrictions on conducting business and shops being open on Sunday, and they were in the process of eliminating that.
Well,
And
it's kind of a bondage they're preaching now.
it is. But see, here's what they say: nobody in the Christian churches ever worshiped on the first day of the week until the Pope changed it, like about the 4th or 5th century. So go to Acts
The
chapter.
Bible takes us
2.
right back to the apostles.
Yeah, go to Acts chapter 2. I mean, most of this stuff, if you just think, use, what's between your ears to do more than keep your ears apart. It either these people just don't make sense, or
Where you at?
there's Acts chapter 2, and Peter preaches his message, okay, and thousands of people come to Christ, and they're down at the end of Acts chapter 2, verse number 42. It says, and they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship, and in breaking of bread, and in prayers, and let's see, make sure I'm okay. Here we go. And fear came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were done by all the apostles, and all that believed were together and had all things common. Get down to verse 45, and sold their possessions good, and parted them to all men as every man had need. And then in verse 46 it says, and they, continuing daily with one accord in the temple, and breaking bread from house to house, did eat their meat with gladness and singleness of heart, praising God and having favor with all people. And the Lord added to the church daily such as should be saved. That daily means on the first day of the week, second day of the week, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh day of the week, all 7 days of the week, daily. They were worshiping the Lord.
Didn't Jesus say he was Lord of the Sabbath, but he's Lord of every day? Isn't
Yeah. And so this says they worship daily. Now, the Seventh-day Adventists teach that nobody worshiped on the first day of the week until the Pope changed it. Well, this is before the Pope ever was even thought of.
Yeah, that's like
And they're
4
daily.
centuries before.
They're daily worshiping, daily, which means that includes the first day of the week. Now, when you continue on through that, let me jump over here to, let's see where I want to go to.
Are you still in Acts? Or you moving on?
Yeah, we're going to be in Acts. I just want to find the one that I'm looking for here. I got to skim down through here to find it. Acts chapter number 20. Now remember, they say that nobody ever worshipped on the first day of the week until the Pope invented this and changed the times. Acts chapter 20, verse number 19 says, and when, oops, I'm in the wrong chapter. Just a minute. Chapter 20, verse 19. Wait a minute, make sure I'm in the right spot here. Acts chapter, oh, I'm too far down. Never mind, I couldn't find it. Go further up in the chapter. Acts chapter 20, verse number 7 says, and upon the first day of the week. Now, if I'm not mistaken, that statement means the first day of the week.
Sunday.
Usually, well, not necessarily Sunday. It says upon the first day of the week. First day of the week started Saturday when the sun set and ended Sunday when the sun set. Remember, the Jewish day went from sunset to sunset.
Okay.
Okay, that's why right now we're on the last day of the week because the sun is down.
Friday to Saturday.
Yeah, this is the last day, and the Sabbath is Saturday to Sunday. So now we're on, he says, upon the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul preached unto them. Doesn't that sound like they're having a church service
Yeah.
suspiciously? And ready to depart on the morrow and continue his speech until midnight. So here's Paul preaching, and now this is how they kind of weasel around it. They say, well, it's because Paul was getting ready to leave, they made an exception. Well, okay, they never met on the first day of the week anywhere before the Pope changed it, unless they made an exception. So even if they made an exception, so let's look at the reasoning behind the exception. Well, because he's getting ready to leave, they didn't have any time to do it. They didn't have time to wait until the next day, or to do it at a different time.
It looks like they worship well into the night, too.
Yeah. So this means they probably started at sunset on Saturday night, because it's now the first day of the week. So they're in the evening, but it's the first day of the week. But notice what it says in verse number 6. And we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread, and came unto them to Troas in 5 days, where we abode 7 days. They're there a whole week. He could have easily preached to them on the Sabbath. If nobody in the book of Acts, if nobody ever worshiped on this first day of the week, why didn't he preach to them on the seventh day of the week? He's there. They're there for 7 days. They're there a whole week. He could have easily preached to them on the seventh day of the week. But instead, he preached to them on the first day of the week, because on the first day of the week, they were meeting. And the reason partly was, remember when Paul would go into a particular area, they would go into the synagogue of the Jews. When did they meet? They met on the last day of the week. And they would be there in the Jewish synagogue services. And then there would be a point during the synagogue service where they would have an opportunity to read the scriptures, which of course were Old Testament scriptures, and they would open up the scroll or whatever they were reading, and they would present the scriptures that showed that Jesus was the Messiah. And they would present Jesus as the Messiah using the scriptures there in the synagogue on the last day of the week, on the Sabbath day. Then the next day, they would meet with people that wanted to know more. Well, what's the next day of the week? The first day of the week. So this was their habit. And so they would meet with Jewish people on the last day of the week in the synagogue, try to show them that Jesus is the Messiah that they're waiting for. And then on the first day of the week, the next day, the next night, probably,
The Christians.
yeah, they would meet with people who wanted to know more,
Yeah.
and those who believed, the Christians, and then they would meet together. In addition to that, here in Acts chapter 20, we come down to 1 Corinthians chapter 16. 1 Corinthians chapter 16. And it says here in 1 Corinthians 16 and in verse number 1, it starts saying, now concerning the collection for the saints, as I have given order to the churches of Galatia, even so do ye. Verse 2, upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in store, as God hath prospered him, that there be no gatherings when I come. Well, what's he saying? He's instructing them to bring their offerings together on the first day of the week. Well, what were they doing? Oh, we're not going to worship. We're just going to bring our offerings. Offerings are considered a form of worship, because what are you doing with an offering?
They were at church.
Yeah, but I'm saying, what are you doing with an offering? You're worshiping God by saying, God has blessed me. I'm giving back a portion of what he's blessed me with. It's an act of worship in that sense. And so here they are bringing their offerings together on the first day of the week. Well, when you ignore all these mentions of the early church people worshiping on the first day of the week, then I guess there's no mention of it. So you just have to, I don't see that, I don't hear that. That's apparently what they're doing, because it's here in the Bible, and it's in their Bible. So that's a couple of passages right there alone. Then when you go over to, let's see. Let me see if I can find this one here. On Colossians chapter 2,
Colossians.
Yeah, Colossians chapter 2. He says in verse 16, Colossians chapter 2, verse 16, he says, "Let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink or in respect of an holy day or of the new moon or of the Sabbath days, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ." In other words, he said, let no man respect you in regards to keeping the Sabbath days. But what are they doing? It's all about the Sabbath and whether or not you keep the Sabbath.
Yeah.
And Paul told the Colossians here, don't let anybody be a respecter of whether or not you keep the Sabbath. It doesn't matter anymore. And in fact, he says in verse 18, "Let no man beguile you of your reward in a voluntary humility and worshiping of angels and treating those things which you have not seen, vainly puffed up by his fleshly mind," going on and everything. But it's talking about the idea of being pulled into a servitude again.
Right.
And so here's the thing. This business of the Sabbath, he says it right there, Sabbath days. As Christians, we do not need to keep the Passover or the unleavened bread or the first fruits or the Pentecost or the Feast of Trumpets or the Day of Atonement or the Feast of Booths or anything. We can if we want to, but we're not obligated to.
We got freedom, right?
Yeah.
We have liberty.
We don't have to observe Easter or Christmas unless we want to. We don't have to worry about it. We're not obligated. And that's what they get or don't get. They don't see that we're not obligated. Here's another one in Romans, I think it's Romans chapter 14. Let me take a look here. Yes,
Wasn't Paul trying to say we have freedom?
exactly.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Let me see if this is the one I'm thinking of, Romans 14. Yeah, in Romans 14, he says in verse 5, one man esteemeth one day above another, and another esteemeth every day alike. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. He that regardeth the day regardeth it unto the Lord, and he that regardeth not the day to the Lord, he doth not regard it. So, in other words, talking about the day. Well, what day are you going to worship on? Well, I think you should only worship on the last day of the week. Well, that's fine if that's what you want to do. Well, I think you should worship on the first day of the week. That's fine if that's what you want to do. I think you should worship on both. That's fine if that's what you want to do. As long as you're doing it to worship God. You can worship the first day, the second day, last day, third day, fourth day, sixth day.
Every day.
Any day. They did it, in fact, in Acts chapter 2, daily, meaning every day. There's nothing in the Bible that says thou shalt worship the Lord thy God 6 days and on the seventh you'll be condemned to hell, which is about what they're teaching, because they're saying you've received the mark of the beast. That's why I said on the radio one time, I said, oh yeah, they claim this. I said they came to the church. I stamped him as he was going out the door with the mark, because he worshiped on a Sunday. He worshiped on the first day of the week.
Yeah. Another thing
So,
that they really vehemently preach against is the rapture.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And,
we're going through the tribulation. I'm thinking, well, good luck with that if you want to.
Yeah.
I think verse 13 right here.
Which chapter? Or
Romans chapter 14, verse 13. Let us not therefore judge one another any more, but judge this rather, that no man put a stumbling block or an occasion to fall in his brother's way.
Oh, there you go.
right.
They're putting stumbling blocks.
Exactly. And if somebody wants to keep the Sabbath, you're perfectly free to do
Yeah,
that.
I agree.
And the rapture things, hold that a second. Let me go back to Exodus chapter, it's going to be 20 something, I think. Let me see if I can find it here. We have some mentions of the Sabbath, and actually, the one I'm going to is a little further, but let's first go to the Ten Commandments, Exodus chapter 20 here, or 22 rather, I think it is. Where are we at? Ten Commandments, chapter 20, that's right. Okay, in the Ten Commandments, now keep in mind, Christ fulfilled the law, and we're delivered from the guilt of the law through Christ, but He says this in the Ten Commandments, starting in verse number 7, Exodus chapter 20, verse 7. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. And that's violated by so many people. We had a track around here that said God's last name is not Dan, D-A-M-N, because that's usually how it seems to be said for a lot of people. And a lot of people use his name as an exclamation of shock or surprise. And that's, those are vain usages, and that's condemned in the scripture because it's holy. But then the next thing that it says is, remember the Sabbath. Okay. Actually, I'm jumped in. I forgot the other ones. The first.
Is that
Yeah.
the fourth commandment?
Yeah, because the first commandment is in verse 3, thou shalt have no other gods before me. The second commandment is verse 4, unto thee any graven image. The third commandment is thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. The fourth commandment is remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and the sea and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. And this is the fourth one. These first four have to do with our relationship with God. Remember, in the creation week, 6 days God created the heavens and the earth. Seventh day he rested. So there's actually a principle that's given here, taking a day of rest and thinking about what God has done for us. Okay? Now, the Jewish people entered into a covenant law with God, which is what the Ten Commandments represented.
Right. Verse
And-
2 explains that.
Exactly. And we are, thank you. The Jewish people, like you said, it was explained that there. And this is a part of the God's covenant with them. Now, the principles of this are important. And Jesus basically reinforced most of these principles, and the New Testament in general reinforces most of these principles. Yeah, and on these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. The first commandment being love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and soul and mind. Well, that would include all four of these. The second, your neighbor as yourself. And that includes the next six, which have to do with our relationship with those around us. But what I'm getting at is the Sabbath is never in the New Testament, to my knowledge, quoted as something that we're bound by. Thou shalt not kill. We're not supposed to do that. That is,
Perhaps maybe the only thing we're bound by is to worship the Lord.
yeah.
Not the
And
day necessarily, but just
Yeah.
the idea.
well, and let's take it a step further here. Go back a little further in Exodus to Exodus chapter 20. Let me find it here. Use it here just a minute. Exodus chapter 31. Here's where he elaborates on this. When we put these into context, he says in Exodus chapter 31, starting in verse 12, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak thou also unto the children of Israel. Now, that statement there, unto the children of Israel, says he's talking about the children under this covenant. He says, Speak thou unto the children of Israel, saying, Verily my Sabbaths ye shall keep. And it starts with a Y. Remember, it starts with a Y, ye, you, and your. It's a plural personal pronoun. So he's talking to the Jewish people, the children of Israel, the Jewish people. He's saying, this is upon the Jewish people. Verily my Sabbath ye shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that ye may know that I am the Lord that doth sanctify you. Notice that plural there. This is addressed, the Jewish people were covenant bound as a people to keep the Sabbath. The Jewish people kept the Sabbath alive, and they were keeping it alive in Christ's time. The Jewish people still today awaiting the Messiah because they don't recognize that he already came, are still keeping this alive. This is a sign between the Jewish people and God of their covenant relationship with him. And that's what he elaborates on in verse 14. Ye shall keep the Sabbath, therefore, for it is holy unto you. And then he says, everyone that defileth it shall surely be put to death, for whosoever doth any work therein, that soul shall be cut off from among his people. I haven't seen the Seventh-day Adventists advocating this aspect of Sabbath keeping.
What, executing people?
Yeah, I mean, that what it says. It says right there. And he continues, 6 days may work be done, but in the seventh is a Sabbath of rest, holy to the Lord. Whosoever doth any work in the Sabbath day, he shall surely be put to death. Now we know there's exceptions to that. Go ahead.
Isn't this exactly what they tried to attack Jesus with when he was doing good things on the Sabbath?
Mm-hmm.
They were trying to say you're breaking the Sabbath.
Mm-hmm. But if the ox falls in the ditch on the Sabbath, you have permission to take the ox out.
Yeah, because they added all these other laws on top of this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. Did the priests do any work on the Sabbath?
Sure they did.
Yeah.
If they didn't, they weren't good priests.
Did the rabbis do any work on the Sabbath?
Sure they did.
It's their busy day. They do a lot of work. Now, the law right now that they operate under, especially if you look at like Orthodox Judaism,
Yeah.
somewhere along the line, when electricity became in use, some rabbi ruled that when you turn on a light, you notice, what do you see? A little spark, right? So they said that's kindling a fire. So they cannot do that. They cannot turn a light switch on.
Right.
So if they want lights on, they turn them on before the sun goes down on Friday night.
So according to this, are the Jews still bound by this then?
Well, they're not, but they think they are.
Okay.
Because when Jesus Christ came, he ended this necessity. Now, there's indication that during the tribulation, they will be operating under these principles, and also during the millennial kingdom.
And bringing sacrifice into the
Yeah.
temple.
Yeah, during the millennial kingdom and all. But what happened here is this one right here, again, look in verse 16 there. Wherefore the children of Israel, again, it emphasizes the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations for a perpetual covenant. Now notice when it said there, it switched over to a word that represented the nation as a singular nation in a sense. And then he says in verse number 17, it is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. So this is very clearly the idea of not working on the Sabbath. The idea of this strict Sabbath observance was specifically for the Jewish people. Now, Gentiles were not under that obligation. You know, they could rest on the day, but they weren't under an obligation not to work. You know, there's some places like over in Israel where an Orthodox Jewish business, let's say that you operate a restaurant and you don't want to lose all that Friday night business. So what do? You have a friend of yours who's a Gentile, and Neil, since he's our person with the greatest Jewish ancestry that we have, would look over to me and say, "Hey, I'll sell you my business for $1 for 1 day, and then tomorrow night when the sun goes down, it's back to me." And I go, "It's a deal," and I sell him $1, and he may say, "I'll sell it to you for $1 plus, the profits or whatever." So now it's my business. I'm not under the Sabbath. I can operate the business and keep it going, and he's in the clear.
Or you could crash
Yeah, I could crash it too, but he's only giving me one night, so 24-hour period.
it.
And-
They have good lawyers.
Yeah.
Rats in the-
So it was something that was there. Now, obviously, the rabbis and the priests worked a lot on the Sabbath because you bring these offerings in on the Sabbath, and anybody that's ever been involved in butchering an animal, it's work. You cannot say it's not work. Even if it's something like just like a rabbit or a squirrel, it's still work. It takes effort, and then to keep the fire going. Of course, they weren't allowed to kindle the fire. The fires were already going anyways in the temple, for instance. The fire continually burned. But still, there's the guys over there who were priests who were constantly stoking the fire, constantly maintaining the fires, constantly killing these animals, and going through the butchering process that was necessary to prepare them for the sacrifice, because the blood had to be poured out. Oftentimes the skins and the entrails would be wrapped up in the skins, and they would be taken over here, and fat would be burned on the altar here, and meat would be lifted up as a wave offering over here, and all these different things that were going on. They worked hard on the Sabbath because it was necessary. Just like if the ox fell in the ditch, you couldn't let it stay there and die. You had to take it out. And God, Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath, and He can allow people to do certain things.
So it's a shame they missed the perfect sacrifice.
Exactly. So, but this in Exodus chapter 31 clarifies what He meant about remembering the Sabbath for the Jewish people, because it is a perpetual sign. And for Gentiles, we're not obligated because we're not the children of Israel. There's another passage I was looking at. I think it's Galatians 4. Let's see here. Either Galatians 4 or over Ephesians. Now let's try Ephesians chapter 2. This is more to the point. I'm looking at Ephesians chapter 2 now. Verse number 14, talking about Christ, where he says, "For he is our peace, who hath made both one, and hath broken down the middle wall of partition between us." Verse 15, "Having abolished in his flesh the enmity, even the law of commandments contained in the ordinances, for to make in himself of twain one new man, so making peace, that he might reconcile both unto God in one body by the cross, having slain the enmity thereby, and came and preached peace unto you which were far off, and to them that were nigh." But this idea here in verse 15, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, even the law of commandments contained in the ordinances. We've been delivered from the law. We're not obligated under it. We do not have to keep the law in order to be saved, in order to belong to Him. The Jewish people had to keep the law not to be saved, but to belong to the Jewish nation, if you think about it. Because if they did not keep the law, one of the things that could happen to them is they could be put out. And, they're keeping the law, and that was a part of their national identity. But we don't need that for our identity. Our identity is in Christ. He's the one that broke down the partition between us and God. He broke down the barrier, overcame our sin, and He's delivered us from that. And so, when we look at this, that's why he could later write to the Colossians, where we read earlier about nobody judging us in respect of whether or not we keep the Sabbath. So, but the principle, though, still of maintaining a day of dedicated to the Lord. That's a good thing to do. What's wrong with that? Take a day that we spend serving God and maybe rest and relax a little bit. And but as for me, on Sunday, that's my busiest day of the week. Yeah, no comments from the peanut gallery here. But that's an old expression. What was it? Howdy doody, wasn't it? The peanut gallery was
peanut gallery.
and somebody would say, now, no comments from the peanut gallery, meaning people who would want to say something like you could have said, oh, you never work, or oh, well, at least you work one day. So that would be like a comment from the peanut
Well,
gallery.
I was thinking, you work? That's hilarious.
See, no comments from the peanut gallery.
So let me ask you though, so what did Jesus mean, Pastor, when he said, not one jot or tittle though shall be, the law's not, he said, I came not to abolish the law.
Yeah,
to
but he
fulfill
fulfilled it.
So
yeah.
if we as Christians, we can recognize the law
Mhm.
through the power of the Holy Spirit living within us to keep the law now.
Mhm.
But even if we're not going to keep it perfectly, we are still free because through the blood of Christ we're forgiven.
Yeah, and we're not, and we're not bound to the law in order to maintain our salvation.
God is not judging us for
Yeah.
how
And-
we keep the law.
Exactly,
Right.
and
I think if
also,
we're gonna make it by the law, we gotta keep
Yeah.
every part.
yeah, if we're gonna
Yes,
put ourselves
well,
under the law,
never
it's got to be
said.
under, and that's another area where the Seventh-day Adventists fall short. They only put themselves selectively under the law.
Right.
If they're going to put themselves under Sabbath law, they've got to put themselves under every aspect of the law, and they've got to essentially be more faithful to the law than the Orthodox Jews are.
The one apostle had said, all things are lawful, but not all things
They're expedient, exactly. And so, again, with the Sabbath keeping, we should recognize that, yeah, the Sabbath really does belong to the Lord. And to me, I wonder if that's partly why they eventually went with Saturdays, being a not a work day. But regardless of that, the idea is the sign of the Sabbath, as in not doing any work, like it's laid out
Right.
in the Old Testament, was specific for the Jewish people. And during the millennial kingdom, God will be working through the Jewish people again. And so that will be active during that time frame. And during the millennial kingdom, you're going to have several groups of believers present. You're going to have the pre-flood believers, Seth and Adam and, all of them, Methuselah and all, and Enoch. You're also going to have the post-flood believers prior to the law,
Yeah.
and that would be, you would have Shem, and you would have Abraham, and all these others, Noah, different people. And then you're going to have the believers during the time of the law, and some of those will be the Gentile believers, and some of those will be the Jewish believers during the time of the law, like Moses and his followers. And so you've got these different groups. And then, of course, now, when you become a believer, you're neither Jew nor Gentile, you're in Christ. So we make up a unique group that is referred to in the scripture as the bride of Christ, which will be taken out of the world.
Right.
And then God will begin to work through the Jewish people. And then again, you will have Jewish believers
Yeah.
and Gentile believers.
Yeah.
Now, all of these believers throughout the ages are looking forward to a Redeemer. Job, who was prior to the law, a descendant of Abraham through his son Ishmael, and also through his grandson Enoch. Job was a Gentile, though. He was not Jewish.
Yeah.
And he said, I know that my Redeemer liveth.
Because the Jewish people were not really identified as Jewish Israel
Until after Egypt.
Yeah,
they became a nation.
Yeah, okay, that's right.
Yeah, they became a nation. And then God gave them the law.
But really, it started with Abraham, didn't it?
Well, no, because not all of Abraham's descendants are Jewish.
Oh,
The Arab peoples today are Abraham's descendants, the ethnic, the Arabs.
oh, that's true.
Ishmael. And then Abraham had Ishmael first, Then he was not the son of promise. Then he had Isaac. After Isaac was born, Sarah later died. Abraham had another wife, a third wife named Keturah, and she had sons and daughters. And they became established people. There's a Sheba and Deba, not Deba, what is it? Dedan. Sheba and Dedan, who are descendants of Abraham and his wife Keturah. And they probably make up some of the areas of some of the Gulf states in Gulf Arab states, and as opposed to the Sheba and Dedan that are descendants of Ham, because Ham was the brother to Shem, and Abraham was the descendant of Shem. So there's a Hamitic Sheba and Dedan, and there's a Semitic Sheba and Dedan. So similar names, but different peoples. Then, of course, Isaac had two sons. He had Esau and Jacob. They were fraternal twins. Jacob was not the son of promise. The promise went to, Esau was not the son of promise. The promise went to Jacob. So the Edomites, the descendants of Esau, they're not Jewish. So the descendants of Ishmael, the Ishmaelites, are not Jewish.
Right.
The descendants of Abraham's wife Keturah are not Jewish. The descendants of Abraham's grandson Esau are not Jewish.
So they make up that rest of that whole Middle East region.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's largely where they were. And so the only Jewish people are the descendants of Jacob, and it was Jacob who had his name changed from Jacob to Israel. And that's where the name Israel comes from. Yeah,
They're all the nation of Israel.
exactly. And so now the nation of Israel is growing. And then, of course, remember the famine in the land, and they went down into Egypt. They end up being in Egypt for, a few hundred years. And then they are delivered from Egypt following Moses and Aaron. And that's when God forms them into a distinct nation, because while they were there in Egypt, what was it, 400 years, I think it was, while they were there, they became so numerous that there toward the end, the Pharaoh that arose was concerned because he saw these Hebrew children, and he said, boy, they're becoming numerous. There's a bunch of them, and they're pretty strong and a lot of vitality. And if an enemy comes in and tells them, hey, side with us and help us defeat the Egyptians, we'll reward you. This could be a danger. So they remember the bit where they told the midwives, if it's a male child, kill it.
Yeah.
And they were going to basically a slow genocide.
Well, really, when you look at the genealogy, that's why, people say, oh, you look at all the genealogy in the Bible.
Mhm.
Well, it means something or it wouldn't be there. But when you even look at the genealogy of Christ, we see like Ruth, who was not a Jewess, right?
Yeah, she was
She married Boaz.
Boaz. She was a Midianite. Or Moabite, I'm sorry. Had an M, wrong one. Moabitess. And there's several others that entered in that way.
Right.
And so, but what happened basically was,
That's too much confusion trying to follow that genealogy.
yeah, but they're there, and as you go down through it, they received the law under Moses when they were in the wilderness,
Yeah.
and they continued on, and they came into the land eventually, and they grew, and God blessed them. And of course, under Saul, and then under David, and then under Solomon, they established a huge empire. It was one of the greatest empires of the ancient age. They literally controlled huge tracts because,
Well, where did the Samaritans come in?
well, that
They're not
comes later.
Jews,
That comes
right?
later. They're part Jew. They're descendants of Jews. The northern kingdom. Remember, after Solomon,
Right.
because under Solomon, that was the pinnacle of the Jewish empire. He had an alliance with Hiram, the Phoenician king, and they were sending ships down along the African coast, down around the southern tip of Africa, coming back up like a 3-year journey. And there's also indications that he was sending ships up into the British Isles, getting what was it? not iron, tin, tin.
That's
And,
right, for
Really,
Bruce.
wow.
And then there's also indications that he was sending ships across the Atlantic to the New World. He was bringing huge amounts of copper. At the same time that he was bringing huge amounts of copper, the earlier Native Americans, the ones that don't get credit for being Native Americans, because the later Native Americans that followed that booted them out, that's another political incorrect rant. But yeah, supposedly you're not supposed to call the American Indians Native Americans because they were here first, only they weren't here first. The mound builders were here before them. The mound builders had a thriving trade where they were mining copper in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. They were transporting it through the Great Lakes, right here in Lake Erie, to the Cuyahoga River. They came down the Cuyahoga River. This is at the time of Solomon.
Oh, my goodness.
They were coming down the Cuyahoga River. Portage Path in Akron, one of the oldest continually used transportation routes in North America, was being used to transport from the Cuyahoga River over the Portage to the Tuscarawas River, and from there down eventually to the Ohio River, Moundsville, West Virginia. You can go there today. Was the same reason that Wheeling was established there. It was the northernmost point on the Ohio River that was navigable year round. And Wheeling, at one point, was the largest city in Virginia outside of Richmond. Because remember, West Virginia was Virginia before the Civil War. Moundsville is just outside of Wheeling. And you go there, it has some of the largest the largest mound, I think, is there in Moundsville, as well as these other ones. And they have found copper from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan in Moundsville, West Virginia. Not only that, they have seashells from the Gulf of Mexico. So this is before Christ. There was a thriving
Trade.
commercial trade.
Have they found anything in all this that indicates
Yes,
stuff from Israel?
yes, that's where we're coming to.
Okay.
That's where we're coming to. Now, so they were coming down through the Great Lakes, Cuyahoga River, over the Portage, down the Tuscarawas. Tuscarawas feeds into, which is it the Miami? I think that the Tuscarawas feeds into, I think. But anyway, it goes into the Ohio. And then it goes down the Ohio to the Mississippi, down the Gulf of Mexico. Well, they were coming back up that way because how else did shells from the Gulf of Mexico, seashells from the Gulf of Mexico, get up into Moundsville, West Virginia before Christ? So what was it, Delaware? Not Delaware, what am I thinking of? Newark, Ohio. Somebody in the late 1800s digging in a mound in Newark, Ohio, unearthed this little thing that you can go down to Coshocton and see. Some of us have been down, Kim and I have seen it. You didn't get on that trip, right?
Is it like an urn or something? Or?
It's a little box.
Oh.
It's maybe about half the size or 2/3 the size of this cup, maybe that size. It's a little stone box, and I'll use my mouse as a sample. And inside of it, it's like rounded, and inside of it, there's like a figure of a man. But around the outside edge, there's these inscriptions. Nobody could figure out what it said. Somebody who was familiar with Hebrew writing at the time of Solomon looked at it and he said it's a shortened version of the Ten Commandments in Hebrew lettering of the time. It takes that of the time of Solomon. How did that get in a mound in Newark, Ohio? Well, according to the archaeologist, it's a hoax.
But any of the people that could have committed the hoax didn't know enough to do that.
Well, you're thinking, Neil. You're thinking.
That's
Okay.
inconvenient
You
drill,
you
y'all.
can go down to Moundsville. You can go down to Moundsville, West
You
Virginia,
can look that there.
and there's a museum there. And in the museum, they've got these. What was it? Was they round? Weren't they, Kim? The things in the museum, little clay things or stone things. Were they round, about that big around with the inscriptions on it?
No, it was,
Or-
it
or
was a
tab-
tablet.
okay, it was a tablet, that's right.
Yeah, the one at
In
Moundsville
Moundsville.
was a tablet.
Yeah, a little tablet, and you go down there
Yeah.
and see it. We'd been down there and saw it. Oops, careful! You'll get me knocked offline here. ready to be my social media engineer here. You can look at them. She's competition. So what happened was nobody could decipher these tablets, and again, it was a case of somebody that could read. Yeah, we'll leave this go here as it's broadcasting. Who could read the ancient Hebrew writing from the time of Solomon? Read it, and it made sense.
I'm glad you told here that.
This-
I never knew that.
But if you ask the archaeologist, oh, it's a hoax. You wanted to see that? Come on, throw you up the light.
But the
There
people
you go.
that say it's a hoax don't have an alternate explanation for
Except it's a hoax.
that copper got to Israel. or
Probably
how
because
the
they're
seashell
Yeah.
afraid of
came
the
up.
truth.
Well, and see, now that's the other thing I was getting. We haven't got there yet. So you got these indications that there were Hebrews from the time of Solomon who somehow had a connection in the Ohio River Valley.
Space aliens.
It must have been
Nah.
time travel. I don't know.
So were these
so
townspeople displaced by later tribes?
no, they were trading, but they were trading with the ancient Israelites apparently.
Wow.
Now let's take this a little further back because we're working back to Israel. At
So
the
if you
same
go back to
time,
Solomon when this box is, now how many years is that preceding the Lord's coming?
Oh,
Roughly.
let me look that up here. We'll look that up and find it. But what I was going to say is Solomon at this time was operating a huge copper smelting operation. It actually, people believe that what he had was essentially a Bessemer converter, which the technology was then lost and wasn't reinvented until, what was it, the
1800s.
1800s, yeah.
Maybe-
But Solomon was operating a large copper smelting operation, and they don't know where all his copper came from.
About 1,000 years before Christ.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Bessemer process came in about 1856.
Okay.
Because I worked in the steel mill
Yeah,
for a lot of
so
years.
Solomon was operating essentially a Bessemer converter
Right.
1,000 years before Christ, and the technology was lost because they've actually shown on a technological level, people at the time of Christ in the first century were more technologically advanced than the people who lived 1,000 years later in the year 1000
Have you
and
ever
the year
gone to Kelly's
1500.
Island and seen the huge rock there on the south side of
Uh-huh.
Kelly's Island? And
Yeah, oh
they
yeah.
preserved it. They got a
Yeah.
covering them. And I don't think anybody's ever really deciphered what it all means, but there was all sorts of inscriptions on that
Mhm.
rock.
Now I need somebody that knows that ancient Hebrew. Go look at that, maybe. I don't know. But at any rate, what I'm getting at is obviously there's indications that there was a commerce where copper was being brought over and possibly gold from Central America. And when Columbus got a bunch of navigators, Portuguese navigators, to guide him as they sailed west to get to find another route to the East Indies, and what he was told by these Portuguese, our forefathers used to sail this route. Well, in the book of Jonah, where did he want to go instead of Nineveh? He got on a boat headed where? Tarshish. Tarshish was outside of the Mediterranean on the Atlantic coast of Spain. And there's a military base that we operate there, Rhoda, is near where Tarshish was. Okay? Tarshish was a merchant outpost, and it was the jumping off point for ships that were sailing up to the British Isles to get tin, because tin was a valuable commodity back then. Copper's nice, but it's a soft metal.
So they would smelt the tin and then forge.
Yeah, because when you mix the tin and the copper together, you
Right.
get bronze. Well, in the King James Bible, it says brass because every copper alloy, whether it was with tin or anything else, was called bronze in the brass in the 1600s. The word bronze didn't come into use until later. So brass is not a mispronunciation. It's just in the 1600s, that's the word they used. So tin was necessary because tin was in relatively short supply in the Middle East. And so as a consequence, she's got a picture of that. She'll show it to you here. So as a consequence, they wanted to keep their tin sources secret. And so the Phoenicians and the Israelites under Solomon and King Solomon and then Hiram, king of the Phoenicians, they cooperated sending these ships out because remember he had the boats, the Phoenician boats. And so what happened is they sailed outside the Mediterranean. Their instructions when they were coming into port anywhere in the Mediterranean was to say it's not safe to sail outside of the Mediterranean. Sea monsters and you fall off the edge of the world and all kinds of tall tales. Yeah, because they were protecting their tin sources. Plus, they were getting gold from over in the Central America. Remember the Aztecs and the Incas, all the gold? Cortez coming in wanting the gold. Well, what happened was when Columbus was talking to these Portuguese navigators, they said our forefathers used to routinely sail to the west to bring back gold and stuff. They were descendants of the Phoenicians.
That was going to just say Phoenicians like that.
That lived there in that area, and that was their forefathers.
I think the Phoenicians were very, very, they sailed everywhere.
Yeah, along with the Hebrews.
Because, they talked about the earliest I heard about people coming from Europe before you're talking was was it the Danes or the coming over?
Yeah, the Vikings.
The Vikings, there you go.
Well, and the idea of people coming over,
So
there's
the
more
Vikings
people came than
actually,
people
set
realize.
foot on North America.
Yeah, the ancient Irish, Ireland linguistically is derived from the same name that we get Iberian Peninsula, which is Spain and Portugal, Iberian Peninsula, and Ireland are linguistically related because the Venetians, they settled up in Ireland. Now, I don't know that I would say this is 100% true, but there's a belief that when Jerusalem fell and they were fleeing, remember Jeremiah was there?
Are you talking about 70 AD?
No, when Jerusalem fell to the Babylonians. Nebuchadnezzar.
Way back.
And you had down in Jeremiah's day that Jeremiah and some of the king's guard escaped with one of the king's daughters and traveled to Ireland. Now, this is a rumor, and there's some legend in Ireland that a Hebrew princess married an Irish clan chief. And that there was a guy, his name is derived from Jeremiah. I can't remember how it is in Irish, but it's believed that he was there. But then Jeremiah later went back to the Middle East. But see, if they had been traveling up there, they knew the trade routes, and so now even more of an unreliable story is the tale that Jesus, during those silent years, when after you don't hear about him when he would have been a teenager or in his 20s, that he actually traveled to the British Isles because they said that Joseph of Arimathea, who along with Nicodemus claimed his body, they claimed that Joseph of Arimathea was his uncle and that Joseph of Arimathea was a tin merchant. And he would periodically travel to Britain because the tin mines that were up there. And that he would have taken his nephew with him, perhaps. And again, those are things you can't really prove, but the stories are out there, so you'll hear about them every once in a while. But we do know that the Irish, this was getting to, descendants of the Phoenicians as well, the Irish actually traveled to the New World because the people in New England routinely would find what they called cellars, and they were these little rooms that you could go down in, maybe get a couple people in there, not very big, maybe just a few feet wide and tall enough you could kind of stand in it. But they had these steps that came down, and at the time they had what they called runes, R-U-N-E-S, that the Irish used to write stuff in. And these same runes appear in these cellars. So when the settlers came in, they found them, they used them actually as cellars, or they would build a house on top of it or whatever, and they'd use it to store stuff in because they were made with stone and they were pretty well made. But what they found out was if you stood in the cellar and you looked up the entry to it, like these steps, and you would line up certain things that it would line up with the sun at certain times or the moon or something like that. But they were lined up with on certain dates with certain astronomical features, and so they believed that it was the ancient Irish came there and they used this in some of their religious things. And so there's all kind. There's evidence that the Polynesians traveled across the South Pacific to Easter Island and then over into South America. We know that the Asians came across the land peninsula, Siberia to Alaska and down. The Mongolians and the Plains Indians bear striking resemblances not only in their features but in their customs. The Mongols and parts of Mongolia and the Plains Indians have the same. Remember the totem pole they make,
Yeah.
and the teepees that they make, and the feathered headdress.
So those old customs have been preserved then.
Yeah, the Mongols had the same thing. We had missionaries that were in Mongolia, and they showed us pictures of the Mongols with the same thing. You think that was from an old Western. And then we also have seen things where the Russians came across, probably, at the time that some of the Vikings were coming into North America from this side. We might have had some Russians and even possibly some Chinese come across. So then the Chinese decided that China's, center of the universe. Why would anybody go? And the Chinese emperor made it against it was against the imperial law to travel out of sight of the land because nobody should leave China.
It's amazing when you think, the day of technology we live in, that these people don't get the kind of technology we have. And the amazing things that were accomplished throughout the century.
And we don't know what technologies they lost.
We don't know what they had back then.
Yeah.
They could have been at the same level, possibly.
Or similar things. I mean, they have what they call the Parthian battery, and I've seen reproductions of it. It's a clay pot, and I'm trying to think what it's lined with, but it's got electrodes in it, and if you put, what was it, salt water? I think you put salt water in it, or
Yeah.
it develops a charge.
Oh, yeah. I've heard
It's
of
like,
that.
okay, why did they have an electric battery? What were they doing with it? I mean, we don't know what people prior to the flood had, too, because they were pretty technologically advanced. But
There's the Antikythera, that Greek thing that may have been used to predict
Oh, the disc.
astronomical.
was that the disc one?
Yeah, kind of almost like a timepiece.
Well, the one thing, like
Eclipses.
civilizations and everything, how did they, they navigate all this stuff?
Well, if you look at that, the Greeks were technologically advanced, but their wisdom. That's what kept
They
them.
navigated by the stars, though, we know that.
Well, that's what the Polynesians did. In fact, the Polynesians were nicknamed the Navigators. The Samoan Islands were called the Navigator Islands at one time. They navigated by the stars, the ocean currents, and the wind directions. And they sailed all over the place pretty
So we're
accurately.
getting all that knowledge, the word, right?
Well, no, they got that by watching and studying. But God gave them the smarts to be able to do it. And they were traveling all over the vastness of the Pacific Ocean
Yeah.
when the Europeans were afraid to sail out of sight of land until the invention of the compass and the sextant and all these things that, that enabled them to sail the world. But yet the Polynesians were sailing all over the place.
Yeah, now we've got Fort Christopher Columbus, they want to disgrace his name and write him out of the history books.
Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of history out there that, doesn't get mentioned as much. They can only do so much with history anyway. So in terms of in school, you only have a certain amount of time. They hit the highlights. But the problem is when you get people that, if I didn't study it in school, it didn't happen.
You're right, exactly, yeah. Well, you're right. There's always something we can learn, no matter how old we are or what we learn.
But there's just so many things that uphold the biblical version. You're asking about the Samaritans earlier. What happened was, after Solomon, remember Rehoboam, then the nation broke into two: the northern kingdom of Israel,
Well, it just
southern
seems
kingdom
like
of Judah.
It just seems like the Orthodox Jews really had no use for them. Right?
Well, yeah, but see, here's why: the northern kingdom was conquered by the Assyrians. Remember Sennacherib and all. He conquered the northern kingdom. Well, when you look at the number of people that were taken captive, something had happened to the population of the northern kingdom. Part of it was people in the northern kingdom fled south. So after the northern kingdom fell, the southern kingdom of Judah was composed of people from all 12 tribes. But a number of them also apparently had gone over on the north coast of Africa. Carthage was a colony that was a merchant colony at one time. So a lot of them had centered there. Some of them went in some other places, people don't know exactly, but the ones that stayed, many of them were taken up north, up into Assyria, and they ended up intermarrying with the Assyrians. And so the ones that stayed in the land were part Jew, part Gentile. So that's why he didn't like the Samaritans, because they were polluted Jews in their mind.
And then Jesus went out of his way to praise the Samaritans.
Yeah, there's a couple of them. There's not only the parable of the Good Samaritan, but there's the 10 lepers that were healed. And the one that comes back to thank him, the only one out of the 10, is a Samaritan. So, and then Jesus spends the time with the Samaritan woman at the well. And so we see a number of things there. So, but it is interesting, when you think about it, about in Solomon's day having connection here to the United States, and even to right here where we're at. It would, if you did have a time machine and you could go back to the time of Solomon.
Valley could only talk, huh?
Yeah, you could sit down here at Peninsula and maybe watch a Jewish commercial
I'll tell you what,
party go
the
through.
most I ever studied the history of the valley was going back to about the time of the Moravians.
Mm-hmm.
And then right after the Moravians, the Eries were pretty much wiped out, the Erie tribe.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had, this was part of Spain too at one time, wasn't it? Didn't the Spanish
No, the
have control
Spaniards-
of part of Ohio for a while?
Maybe the southern part, because
And then it was ceded to
the French and Indian Wars, I think, is where we won the Northwest Territories. But the area of Ohio that's down around Cincinnati.
The 16th century, Spain had a holding up in part of Ohio.
I don't know. I don't know about Spain. I know the French did,
Well, yeah, that
and
was-
and of
French
course,
did, right?
then you had this area that we're in right now is claimed by Connecticut,
Right, Western Missouri.
and then a little further south it was claimed by Virginia,
Right.
and
Well, they say that George Washington was up into like Marietta
yeah,
when he was a surveyor.
yeah. Well, the first city of the Northwest Territories, first city west of the Ohio River was Marietta.
Did you ever go down to the Serpentine Mounds down
Yeah.
in Central Ohio?
Yeah.
I've been there, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. In Marietta, there's actually a cemetery that's one of the oldest oldest used cemeteries in the world, because it's a cemetery around a mound. The mound itself is a burial mound, and then they built a cemetery around it. So there's a cemetery in Marietta that's still being used.
Cemetery
That's got a mound that was itself a cemetery.
I think the creepiest cemetery I was ever in was St. Augustine. When I
Mm.
was down there one time and they took us on a tour through there. And because that goes back.
Well, I've never been there, yeah.
1500s, that cemetery.
Oh, you're talking about in Florida?
Yeah, St. Augustine,
Okay.
because that was the first one of the first settlements,
Mhm.
settlements in
Spanish, right? But yeah, so I mean, I guess what I'm saying is when you look into the Bible, you find so many things, and then you look in the world around that you can see where it corresponds. And
I have no idea what you just told me. Wow, I didn't realize that there was people going that far back. Establishing trade routes,
Well, you gotta figure too, when you had the collapse of Rome, and I mean, like them or hate them, they actually stabilized the world in that period. you
right,
know?
they
And,
built the roads, which
yeah. and
Yeah, somebody
infrastructure,
pointed out,
and then
here's a
when they
Roman-
fell,
here's a Roman road that was built, 1,500 years ago or something like that, or 2,000 years ago, and it's still passable today. And then they show a road that we built today.
look at the ductwork they had. Look at the ductwork they had too.
Wait a minute, we should get a time machine, get some of them guys and bring them up here to build. They could have done 76 through Akron. They'd have done it a lot faster using picks and shovels. And it would be drivable.
Well, they didn't have to deal with state contracts either.
Well, that's true. They were the state. They just did it.
that's the thing you learn by reading this, nothing has changed throughout the history of the world. People operate the same. That's just
The heart is basically the same.
Yeah.
The man still got that same
Politics
basic
are the
sin
same.
nature,
You're at
lies,
the
deceptions,
same greed.
misinformation, yeah.
Human nature doesn't change.
I was listening to somebody on the radio this morning. Tomorrow is the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, which, remember Reagan, just a little before that, made his speech where he said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." State Department, everybody told him, "Don't say that. It's too incendiary. It's going to be confrontational and cause too many problems." And they took it out of his speech, but he said it anyway. And that was the most iconic phrase that he uttered. And but this guy I was listening to on the radio this morning, he said that he was over there when the wall was coming down, and said that you had these young people who grew up under nothing but communism, knew nothing but communism their entire life. And as soon as the wall started coming down, they were scooping up chunks of concrete or breaking off chunks of concrete, and they were selling it to tourists on the western side of the wall to get money to go buy stuff. And he said it didn't take long for capitalism to take root or hold of these people who knew nothing but communism all their life.
Did you hear what Putin supposedly said? What, a year or two ago? He said something about, what's the matter with some of the Americans? They want socialism?
That should be more widely advertised.
Yeah.
I mean, he was almost like making a laughing stock out of the people over here.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, what's the matter with people,
Well, yeah. I mean, they're not thinking straight. They don't look at history. They don't look at the present. All you have to do is spend a month or two in Venezuela. That would cure you of that.
Yeah, well, you start reading what the revolution was all about, and your founding fathers, they knew what tyranny meant. Now,
Mhm.
our people, and a lot of people in America do.
And socialism is soft tyranny, which leads to hard tyranny because it's communism is it's
Schools don't teach history.
no. And
Well, and it is, socialism, the more you look at it, the more it looks to me like a religion.
well, it is in the sense that under communism there is no God.
Right.
The state is God.
Absolutely.
It's a statist religion. And socialism, like I said, is soft communism. It is communism,
It is.
but it's a soft form because
They whitewash it.
they kind of make it look a little more
They
presentable
put a paint on it.
until they get fully in charge. Because remember, the Soviet Union was the union of Soviet socialist republics. And then Germany was the National Socialist Party. Because, they always say, oh no, they're fascist, they're right wing. No, they were left wing. Mussolini, the leader of the Italian social or fascists, was the editor of Avante, which was the leading socialist communist newspaper of Italy prior to becoming the dictator. Avante means forward, which, well, we had a president who used that theme, didn't we?
Yeah, great. Used to see the stickers.
And when they took
Hope
over
and change.
in Hungary, when the communists took over Hungary, the theme that they used, the motto that they had was forward.
If you look at our history though, the progressive movement really began sometime after the Bolshevik Revolution.
It was communism. That's what it was.
Okay,
It's
that's
progressivism
Mm-hmm.
is socialism leading to communism. It's basically all what the
Exactly.
Democratic platform is all about.
Well, and they would have these pictures of Lenin and workers marching, and it would say forward.
Right.
That's always been their marching cry, forward, meaning we're going on to this perfect state. Communism is going to be, or capitalism is going to be left in the ash heap of history. And we're going to go on to utopia.
It's amazing how they like to use capitalism to get to that level. And then, when they get to that certain level, implement communism.
Well, in the communists, everybody's equal except some people are more equal than others.
Well, there, you know, it's the idea of the elitist is like you go out and labor, and I'll take the fruits of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, Bernie Sanders is a perfect example of that. How many real jobs has Bernie Sanders had outside of politics?
0.
You appoint a lot of people.
Yeah. And so how many houses does Bernie Sanders own? Yeah, but I was going to say, how many houses does Bernie Sanders own? And I guarantee each one of his houses is bigger than any of our houses.
Is that true? Him and his wife got married in the Soviet Union?
Oh, they honeymooned in the Soviet Union
Oh, okay. Something.
back during the Cold War. You know, you didn't just,
Well, at least
Take a
I'll
honeymoon
give him
there.
credit for one thing. At least he makes no bones. about
yeah,
it.
I mean, he's honest about it. So,
Democrats.
well, the Communist Party USA back, I think it was about the time that Bill Clinton was running, they stopped running a candidate for president because they used to always have a candidate for president.
Yeah.
They stopped running it because at about that time they said the Democrat Party platform is the same as ours.
But then you look at some of the Republicans too. Like, so look at George Bush Sr. I remember watching him on television.
The New World Order?
Talking about the New World Order.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? But he also used the term Brave New World. Where
Mhm.
did that come? Right out of Huxley.
Yeah. Well, and remember when he ran against Reagan for the nomination, he coined the term. Didn't he coin the term voodoo economics?
Yeah.
And he was the elitist, globalist, basically,
Well, yeah.
progressive
Yeah.
Republican.
Well, look at Kissinger too. A lot of people didn't like what he was saying either. You know,
He's the one that started it, in 21, too.
Yeah, he was a big globalist.
Yeah, so I mean, the facts speak for themselves.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But
And that was one of the communist goals, capture one or both parties.
yeah, well, they
got
fully
one.
captured the Democrat Party, and they were on their way to capturing the Republican Party. Well, and the other
They
thing
got the
is
public schools.
they also captured public schools, and you look at what happens in average university, they've definitely captured that. They also want to capture the churches.
Well, you're
And,
too young to remember, but I remember starting in Richfield Elementary School in fall of 1961, and guess what? We were pledging allegiance, but we were also being led by our teacher in a school prayer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, by the time I got there, we
When I
didn't have
went
that.
Back in the fall for the 63 school year, they said no more prayer, we're still pledging allegiance.
Yeah.
That was it. It was over.
Yeah, because I started in 60. What would it be, 64, I think, or 65, I guess it was for
Yeah, so
kindergarten.
when those school prayer was
Something like
gone, you started.
I think I was first grade, I started in 65,
From
66,
kindergarten,
something like that, yeah.
1959 until 63, we were praying in school.
Yeah, when I came through, we did the pledge, but we never prayed or had a Bible reading of any kind.
So, I mean, just in my lifetime, I look back on the changes that I've seen, and I think, wow,
Yeah, Cliff, you went to what school? What school did you go to? You went through what? Parma? Now, were they still doing the prayer or anything all the way through for you, or
No,
now what year did you graduate?
60.
60 now. So you said high school they weren't doing the prayer or anything in high school. Yeah. Now,
Our teachers were still legal.
when you got into junior high, were they doing the pledge in junior high at Revere? Because by the time I got there, they weren't.
No, they weren't doing
We only did it through
it
sixth
was all
grade.
strictly Richfield Elementary.
I didn't know if
you're right.
Bath did it or
Now,
not,
we would
but
do it, I think, at special assemblies, I think, maybe.
yeah, at special assemblies. But we did not do it
Not as a daily thing in
No.
the classroom. No.
because at Richfield Elementary, every day, the start of the school day, you stood up and somebody was selected to read it. They go down to the principal's office.
Well, our teacher used to say, take one student and would go hold the flag, too.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think we had a flag in the room by then.
Yeah.
And then somebody would go down to the principal's office, and over the PA, they got to lead the whole school in the
I'm really
pledge.
thankful that I got to see a little bit of that, before it went away.
Yeah.
What
So-
a shame. You know what? Why did we allow that to happen? Why did we allow abortion? Why did people
Well,
scream?
Big part of it is
about abortion,
Christians.
You know?
Christians are the largest voting bloc in America, and they're the largest non-voting bloc.
Most apathetic. Well, yeah, I remember when
That's right.
abortion came in. I was 1 year out of high school, and my mom said, "What? Where are the Americans? Why aren't we standing up screaming about this?"
I was in high school, and we had a debate. We had some debate in this one class, and we had the pro-abortion side and the pro-life side. And the person on the pro-life side said, if we allow abortion, it's going to lead to euthanasia and things of that nature. The person on the pro-abortion side said, "Oh, that will never happen. Nobody ever think of that. Nobody will ever think of euthanasia or selective abortions or anything." Now what are we seeing?
Yeah.
All of those things.
You bet.
Well, it's even in that, Health and Human, that Obamacare mandate.
Yes. The death panels.
Yeah, they are starting stages of that.
Yeah.
So
Well-
turn to that.
Yeah.
Can I butt in on this?
Certainly.
On the radio, on the television today, I went and hollered at Betty to get it to her tonight. But these abortion places that have abortion, there's not enough, so they're teaching their younger kids on how to take care of that. On television.
Well, and you look at the gender confusion too.
Mhm. We need to pray for our country, and
I went to the
Christians
doctor
got to
the
get
other day
out.
with a chiropractor, and I hadn't been there for a long time. And so he said, "Make out my uniform forms since we're up in the form," so I filled it out. I was kidding because he got on there, the name and this and gender, so gender, people on this. I said, "You're getting yourself in trouble." He goes, "Why?" I said, "You only got 2 genders on here." I said, "You better put other on here."
Oh, hey, we're after 9 o'clock. We should go ahead and pray, and that way people who need to leave can head on out. So let's go ahead and pray. All right. Heavenly Father, Lord, I want to thank you again for the opportunity we had to come together tonight, talk about some of these things, look into your word, look at some of the history, Lord, and even of this area here. I would just thank you that we have the freedoms that we do. Help us not to take it for granted. And again, use us for your glory. Bless, watch over us as we leave here. Keep us safe from the roads. Bless today, tomorrow. And bless today on Sunday for your glory. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Before you get involved.
All righty. Well, good to see everybody. And I'm going to, yes.
I got involved in a internet scam.
No.